All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be talking today. It is Wednesday, hump day. Always happy on Wednesday. I didn't even realize it was Wednesday until I just said it was Wednesday. And I'm getting a late start. I don't always talk about why I start at a certain time. Sometimes I do, other times I don't. Family situation today, had to run my wife over to the airport due to a family situation. So as a result, I'm starting a little later than usual. And just took up a lot of time, a little prep time, and I went back to sleep because I was so tired, man, getting up so early, and then I was sort of still on Seattle time, so a lot of stuff going on. All right, I called the program. Sometimes I try to ask questions in my thumbnails to give you an opportunity to respond, right? To say, okay, this is what this is about. This is a question for me. I think yesterday was Bernie. Is he a sellout? Is Bernie helping, right? That was the question. And then there were saviors. Is he a savior, sellout, something else? I did get a response to that, and I'll talk about later in the program. Today, though, the real monsters, and I didn't even put a question mark. I put an exclamation point with the headline there from NPR, where the Bibi family, that's the family that lost the mom and then the two kids, one of whom was under a year old. I think the other maybe two, maybe even somewhere in the 1 to 2 year range, were killed, maybe a little older, but very, very young child, along with an infant or at least a baby, were killed along with a mom in the aftermath of the Hamas raid on October 7 in Israel. They were killed in Gaza, and how they were killed is, I guess, still somewhat up for debate. Question the real monsters, and I put in kind of bold and highlighted Prime Minister Netanyahu, because that's who the family themselves are blaming. It seems clear that they hold him responsible for the mom and her children's deaths. But I also added in the discussion the names Joe Biden, Antony Blinken, of course, Secretary of State under Biden, and Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense. And the question is, what about them? And it's hard for me. This is tough. Their names came up. I'm going to get into kind of this discussion a little bit, my thought process. Their names came up because of an email I received this morning from Code Pink, which is just such a great organization, and they're the true heroes right now, fighting so desperately against genocide, against ethnic cleansing, against war. And they're doing it in a nonpartisan way. They're just totally principled people. So I have extraordinary respect for them and their opinion, and I work with them, right? So, I mean, I wouldn't do that if I didn't agree with them. But I'm not totally sure I like the idea of calling for ICC investigations into Biden, Blinken, and Austin. I'm sure they should be. I'm not saying there isn't good reason to investigate Biden, Blinken, and Austin. There is. And people who commit crimes should be prosecuted for those crimes, especially violent crimes, even if they're out of power, even if they're no longer in a position to commit them. I mean, if somebody is a rapist or a murderer, even if they're now crippled, even if they're disabled, even if they're incapable of committing more crimes, I don't think we say, okay, well, we'll let it go, right? We're going to say, okay, well, you were you destroyed people's lives. Kind of an example of that might be that's Bill Cosby. Well, he did terrible, terrible things to many women, but he's old and he's infirm, so let it go. No, we don't take that position. I don't think we should. But the question turns a little bit when you have someone in power and they're part of a long line of what I would call war criminals, thugs, what have you, constitution breakers. So, yes, what Biden did and what Blinken did and what Austin did is absolutely terrible. And I'm not one of those people who even believes it's okay, if you let 10 speeders go, the 11th gets to go too. But you look at what W did, right? I mean, he countenanced torture. He actually called for torture. Him and Torture Dick did in their administration. You look at what Obama did, killing extrajudicially American citizens with drones. What Trump is doing now, leveraging the proxy war with Russia to extract mineral concessions from Ukraine. I don't know if that's quite illegal, but it sure doesn't look, it looks really sketchy, shady. Also, Trump clearly violated the emoluments clause in the Constitution. And, he was impeached for that, but I think people roundly understood those to be political prosecutions, and they redounded badly for the Democrats. So I think you have to say, in context, is what Blinken, Biden, and Austin did unique? Is it especially evil? And it's really bad. It's really, really, really bad. So I'm close. I'm on the fence. But then we look at what Trump is doing now, which I think in some ways is worse than what he did during his first administration, especially with regard to the 2,000-pound bombs being sent to Israel. I'm queasy. I'm queasy about a partisan call. And it seems partisan, right? It feels partisan that now we're going to say, let's prosecute Biden and let's prosecute Lloyd Austin and let's prosecute Blinken for war crimes, even though I think they're guilty. It feels partisan, and it makes me somewhat uncomfortable. Okay, so we'll get into that in greater detail. Please do join me at any point, 240-242-5646, 240-242-5646. Just checking my ringer. It is ringing. We're on live, so I'm available. This is from NPR, Dateline today, February 26. Israelis hold a funeral procession for Shiri Bibas and her two sons I mentioned earlier in the intro, killed in Gaza. And you can see the coffins being held up and the Israeli flags. It's, kind of this it is awful what happened, right? But it's this kind of, almost orgy of self-pity. Woe is us, 3 people who were killed, but without any consideration for the well over 50, 60, 70, 100, maybe more thousands killed by Israel, by the government of the people in this image here. That's just not even under any, consideration. And that just kind of disgusts me, sickens me. It really does. But okay, Bibas and her kids were Israeli, and you worry about your own people first. I understand that. But what about your victims? Shouldn't you spare a moment for their humanity? And I don't see that from Israel. And it just so upsets me. It so disappoints me. From the NPR article, very, very interesting stuff here. The hope had been, of course, that although it was a faint hope, because Hamas announced, I think in 23, right within a month or so after October 7, they announced that I believe that Bibas had been killed. They said from the beginning they were killed. The family was killed, or at least Shiri had been killed by Israeli air during and by an Israeli airstrike. So that was unexpected. And by the way, they're the ages. Ariel was 4 and Kiefer was 9 months. And they had hoped they would be freed alive. But again, that was a very, very faint hope. And I don't think too many people were optimistic anyway that would happen. By the way, don't forget when you're watching Halitics, if you get a chance, and I want to see more subscriptions coming in, I'm not seeing those, click that bottom right, subscribe now. It's right where the Halitics oval is on your screen. please do click that. And also, yeah, love to see you become part of us on Facebook. The Halitics group on Facebook is very active, a lot of commentary, and it's, right now we're kind of debating. I resolved it, but, we debated the fate of a poster who, has been insulting. I just won't allow that. I won't allow that. I made a decision. The poster will come back, but we just can't have that. All right, 240-242-5646 if you want to join me. Would love to talk to you. So there was a pretty strong suspicion, fear in Israel well over a year ago that this family was never going to be returned alive to Israel, that they were already dead. And it turns out they were, in fact. And, I think NPR they're exactly right. Then they use the passive voice. Often we don't like the passive voice because it seems to sanitize the killing, right? Instead of saying Israel killed 500 people today or however many they killed. Israel killed 100. Maybe there weren't a 500 victim day, but they killed 110 people today by bombing a refugee camp, by bombing a hospital. Instead, 110 people were killed today during a action, right? So that's far more sanitary. But in this case, we don't know. There isn't certainty as to how the Bibas family met its death. And so for NPR to say a mother and children killed while captive in Gaza is true. They were killed while captive, but who killed them? Therein lies a big rub. The Israeli authorities say it was Hamas, and in fact, the militants, I guess if you want to call them that, have been called monsters by the Israeli ambassador, and of course by Netanyahu repeatedly. They are invariably emphasizing or de-emphasizing their humanity and claiming that these people are not, part of our group. They're outsiders. They need to be. They're not part of they're not even human. They're subhuman. That's the Israeli way of trying to build support for their genocide. And they extend the Hamas brutality, which is how they're characterized as simply brutal, inhumane, non-people. They extend that to all Gazans. There's no innocence in Gaza. You hear that a lot. We have to kill them now before they grow up, because then they'll want to kill us, which they will. The Hamas charter calls for the eradication of Israel. Maybe, I don't know. I don't read Arabic and I don't trust Israeli translators, but maybe it does. But not sure how that means it's okay for Israel to kill scores and dozens and hundreds and thousands of Palestinians. We don't know how Shiri Bibas and her children met their end, but Hamas says they were killed by Israeli airstrikes, which would make a lot of sense because the remains were so completely just sort of disintegrated, like they were fried alive, burned alive in a bombing, which is consistent, with the remains. But Israel says no. Israel says they've been killed by their captors, choked to death. And again, that is consistent with Hamas's claim, because suffocation and then incineration is exactly how many people who are caught up in these bombing raids die. It's not some explosion. It's not shrapnel. It's the heat and the lack of oxygen, the oxygen all being consumed in the conflagration that results, from the bomb. So that's would explain exactly how come the Bibas family's remains were virtually, they were unrecognizable. They had to be tested. And first Israel said, oh no, that isn't the mom. And apparently it wasn't. Hamas got confused itself, which, again, is consistent with an air raid killing. Well, who do the family hold responsible? Who do they blame? Because I think that goes a long way towards who we should consider responsible. And especially if the family says, hey, it wasn't even Hamas that we hold responsible. I mean, after all, if you'd think, right, the Hamas was the force that took these people, they took them from Israel, they kidnapped them and held them hostage. So wouldn't the family most likely blame Hamas? And if they did, it would be understandable. I'm not sure that I would necessarily be willing to condemn Hamas based on the family's condemnation, but I would certainly take it seriously. But here, Ofri Bibas, I guess the sister of Shiri, the mom, she's called the aunt, so I assume she's the aunt of the children. Prime Minister Netanyahu, we haven't received an apology from you in this terrible moment. So who is Ofri blaming? It would seem she's blaming her own country's leader. She's saying it's Israel's fault. It's the prime minister's fault. Now, is she saying that because she believes it was an Israeli bomb that killed them? Quite possibly. We don't know. Another interpretation is she blames Netanyahu because in response to the attack on October 7 and the subsequent hostage taking, rather than acknowledge that there were hundreds, I believe, there were hundreds of hostages, hundreds of live Israelis and people from other countries, Americans, and I think there were some Jordanians and others who had been taken that day on October 7, some from the music festival, some from nearby villages and kibbutz, rather than doing his utmost to protect and save those who were alive. The response from the Netanyahu government was scorched earth, was let's just destroy everything that moves in Gaza. Let's turn Gaza into part of greater Israel. And Ofri Bibas may be saying, and because of that, because you took that action, you went full bore, let's raze, destroy, lay waste to Gaza in the course of those military activities. You killed my sister, you killed my nephews, or she might be saying, because you did that, you exposed them to being killed by Hamas. Could be either one. I don't know. But what I do know is that Ofri Bibas holds her own government accountable. And yet we don't. Yet we don't on social media through both the former president, the former administration, the Harris-Biden administration, the military and foreign policy team there, as well as the current administration. Hamas is viewed as solely responsible for the deaths that occurred on October 7 and thereafter. It's clearly just not true. It's not an accurate reflection of what happened, and it is a terrible, terrible stain on us as a nation, belied by the very victims themselves. So here's what Haaretz says. Now, it's interesting because the Bibas family obviously is in deep mourning, and understandably so. The country itself is in deep mourning. It's unclear whether this pity, which is understandable under the circumstances, is part of just hatred, complete desire to eradicate all of Hamas and all of Palestine, or if it is, as we see in the Bibas family, targeting also, maybe predominantly, the Israeli administration. It's unclear. Haaretz discusses, it's very interesting, and this was part of, and I looked this up because of the email I received from Code Pink. Code Pink saying, hey, Israel is falling apart. Israel is disintegrating. The violence that Israel has wreaked on its neighbor, on the Palestinian people, on those who should be part of their country, is destroying Israel. And their narrative is falling apart too. And they cited in his Code Pink email the fact that one of the Israeli captors, I did not know this, one of those who had been captive and held by Hamas, actually kissed the forehead of one of the captors who was releasing him. And this has been made much of in the Arab community. I won't do that. I mean, I won't say, oh, this proves that Hamas didn't mistreat the hostages, that the hostages were really given fair and humane treatment while in captivity. I won't say that at all. I mean, there's a million reasons this could have happened. One big reason is simply Stockholm syndrome. You start to associate with your captors and start to look up to them, right? That's what was shown by the Stockholm syndrome, that sometimes prisoners, not all, but in certain cases, some prisoners may become, feel affinity with those who are holding them. So I think that's a big explanation for this. Now, again, this isn't to condemn all Palestinians or even to condemn particularly Hamas. It's just to say I wouldn't use the fact. I think it's absurd to use the fact that one Israeli hostage now, upon his release, is kissing a captor, to say, oh, well, this proves the basic innate humanity of the Hamas militants. No, I wouldn't do that. This shows that they're somehow benevolent. By the way, go ahead and click like if you haven't done that. That's another thing you can do to support our show. Click the like on the Halitics YouTube page. Yeah, so I can't, see this as much of anything. I think we always have to look at the media with a very jaundiced eye and look at, specific stories and question what they mean. So that said, yes, the Arab world wants to look at what happened with that particular hostage. Here's the picture, and say, okay, this just proves Israel is the true violent war criminal, not Hamas. And I basically agree that is true, that Israel is far more complicit, far guiltier, has done far worse even than Hamas, as much as what Hamas did was terrible. I think what Israel's done, for a variety of reasons, which I've explained, is worse. But I'm not going to say, oh, this proves they're somehow these wonderful, kindly Hamas folks. Now, Israel's response, because they're looking really bad, right? They're like, oh my God, this captor kisses those who kept him hostage. How can that be? This just proves everything we've said about how they're dogs and they're animals. So Israel immediately replies, and Khan is Israeli media, reported on Sunday that Shem Tov, that's the hostage in the picture, said when he came back that the dogs, Hamas made me do it. I had no choice in regard to the kiss. So I don't believe that either, right? I mean, I don't believe the Khan Israeli Hasbara disperser, and I don't believe Arab media either. I don't believe American media. That's what is so challenging, right? We don't know who to believe, and frankly, we probably shouldn't believe anybody in cases like this, when there's a big fight over public opinion and trying to garner sympathy for one group rather than another. But what we can look at, what we should look at, what we should be always mindful of, are facts that are much, much harder. I mean, we know the guy kissed his captors. We don't know why he did it. And what he says, even after the fact, may or may not have been coerced. Let's say he says, oh yeah, the dogs made me do it. But maybe he's only saying that because he's under a lot of pressure from Israel to say it. Or maybe it's true. But here's what we do know. This is Dateline yesterday. 5 babies have died due to cold weather in the past 2 weeks. So the Bibi family suffered terribly. And two 4-year-old and an infant or under a year-old baby died. The mom was killed. It's horrible. But in the past 2 weeks, 5 babies have died due to cold weather. Unheated tents used by displaced families and other infants remain at risk due to weather. This is what's happening right now. And nobody's stopping. Nobody's stopping the exposure to the deaths due to exposure. Trump would say, well, this is why we need Jordan to take them in. This is why we need to clean out the area. We need Egypt. Probably there's truth. It's not completely false. Yeah, these people need places to go. But Israel has been awfully slow to let in any aid. And the U.S. isn't forcing them to. Which is why, getting back to the question of Blinken, Blinken, and nod. No, Biden, Blinken, and Austin. Close. Blinken, Biden, Blinken, and Austin, Blinken. That's why do we really need to go after prosecuting them at this point? And maybe we do. Maybe we should, right? Hangmen should also die, as the movie by Fritz Lang says. But there's a lot of hangmen out there. And when you go after one hangman because they're a member of one party but not another party, you lose some credibility, and understandably so. Okay, I think it's terrible that Trump has authorized, the shipment and continue the shipment. This is one of the reasons why I'm skeptical about just putting Blinken, and nod, Biden, Blinken, and Gates, or no, Austin. Gates was another general, I believe. Why I'm skeptical of just putting Blinken, and nod, Biden, Blinken, and Austin in the dock, because look at what Trump's doing. Trump's Gaza plans rejected as ethnic cleansing, and he resumed shipments of these 2,000-pound bombs. How is that not? I mean, it's not a war crime at this moment because the bombs aren't being used. But they may well be soon. You can't believe that's not going to happen. I'm trying to, I cut Trump some slack for this reason. There's still a ceasefire. It had been put on hold. Well, it hadn't been put on hold exactly, but Israel was threatening to blow up the whole thing. They had delayed the release of prisoners under it. And at least for now, we don't know what Trump has said. We don't know what Witkoff has said. But the bombing isn't continuing. The killing, the wanton, indiscriminate mass killing of Palestinians in Gaza has not resumed since Trump took office. And to me, that's a big argument why you would say, okay, let's go after Blinken, Biden, and Austin, right? Because I don't think you want to selectively prosecute. But the problem is Trump's actions are, I think, making it possible that the killing will again happen. What do you think? Do you think, and I'd love to get some calls. I haven't been getting calls lately, which disappoints me. I'd love to get some calls on whether you think Code Pink is right, that we need the ICC to investigate and presumably prefer charges against Biden, Blinken, and Austin. Do you think that's right? Honestly, I don't have an answer. I guess if when I signed the petition, I said, yeah, go ahead and do it. If you do that and you're like 25 years old, you're 18 years old, you sign something like that, you could be kissing goodbye a future in many fields. You could be doxxed for that. I mean, it takes not for me any courage, but for people who are needing, work, who need to be employed. You signed a petition calling for Joe Biden to be investigated by the ICC. You're putting your future in jeopardy. So I think that's something to bear in mind, that so many people, 5,000 I think, have signed this. Now, they're not necessarily all American. Israel's committing ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. Israel declared the IOF, that's what they call the Israeli, which is officially the Israeli Defense Forces. They call, Code Pink calls it the Israeli Offensive Forces, will remain in the West Bank for the next year. 40,000 displaced from refugee camps, not allowed to return. And on and on and on, just how terrible. And certainly Biden, Blinken, and Austin deserve a lot of blame for that. But what about Trump? This is continuing under Trump. If you're going to prosecute Biden, Blinken, and Austin, shouldn't you also go after Trump? And that they're not doing that at this point. At least Code Pink isn't. And I think it's, again, the ceasefire is at least for now, as precarious as it is, as fragile as it is, holding. But that doesn't excuse what's happening in the West Bank. U.S. doesn't just support Israel, it makes every attempt to bury its crimes. The ICC doesn't hold Biden accountable. These are crimes that will go unpunished. Yeah, I know. So many do. And then here's the kind of the brief, which is very powerful. It's accurate. I don't think this is, and one more point before I just get into these specifics. I hear a lot from people, from some who will say, oh yeah, when you say we need to vote for Jill Stein, you're making the enemy of the good, meaning Harris, Biden are good. And I've been adamant in saying they're not good. They're not good. Clearly, they're not good. And nothing proves that more than their support for genocide. But all that said, I also reject the argument that some have made that, well, if you think Trump is better because at least there's a ceasefire now, then why do you even support Jill? And you shouldn't support Jill Stein. You should just support Trump. And of course, that's ridiculous too. I don't think Trump's any good. I think Trump's terrible too. That's a major assumption of this program, is that both parties are awful. We need to go in a completely different direction. But those of you who believe that somehow I'm making the perfect the enemy of the good when I criticize Biden and Harris, well, look at this. Joe Biden, and this is from Cope, it just came today, ensured U.S. weapons and money kept flowing to Israel. He bypassed congressional review to approve arms shipments to allow Israel to receive them unconditionally. In other words, do whatever you want with those bombs. Blinken, despite repeated warnings from his own staff, this is absolutely accurate, and American agencies, that Israel was blocking humanitarian aid to Gaza, which is a condition for by the way, it's a condition for withholding weapons. In other words, if it's determined that the U.S., that Israel is blocking humanitarian aid, then it's not a condition. It doesn't mean you get to withhold weapons. Withholding weapons is required by law. He violated American law, right? Which is a strong argument in favor of holding Blinken accountable. Of course, Biden did too. And he never withheld the assistance. And then General Austin ignored reports from his own department, citing evidence for Israel's war crimes, and continued providing. So all three. I mean, it's very Nazi reminiscent, isn't it? It's very Nazi reminiscent. When you read that, you think they need to be prosecuted. But again, you go into this, he did this, but she did that. Who should be, who do we hold responsible? Trump is now selling 2K bombs to Israel. Would some kind of investigation or even prosecution ultimately deter future war crimes by American presidents? Maybe. I mean, that's a good argument for doing it. I don't know. These are very difficult questions. These are hard questions. Right now, honestly, as bad as Biden and Harris were, and they were bad, really, really bad, I'm more concerned with the current president. I still am optimistic. He is talking to Putin, which is a great thing. It's not just a good thing. We shouldn't have to call it great. Of course, we should always be talking to adversaries as well as allies. But, look at this. What the hell is this about? Trying to leverage Ukraine's desperation into getting mineral concessions? I mean, it's crackpot stuff. This is Trump's crazy art of the deal. I'm a wheeler dealer. I've got them over a barrel. They need us so badly. They're going to give us their minerals. The New York Times response was nothing about showing appreciation for Ukraine being a bulwark against Russian aggression and saving Western Europe from the Russian bear. Well, I mean, those are two equally insane takes. One is that somehow by fomenting war with Russia, by refusing to negotiate with Russia, by forcing Ukraine to sacrifice maybe 100,000 people, troops, and kill many more civilians, that somehow that saved Western civilization. It's absurd. On the other hand, Ukraine has paid a terrible price. And Trump is now making it even worse. Trump also offering no security guarantees. France saying we have to secure Ukraine. I'm okay with some kind of security guarantee. Apparently, what Trump is saying is, well, the UN will be the neutral arbiter. And that is right. If that is true, now I read that the Trump administration is positing that the UN should act as a peacekeeping force in that region, which is 100%, 1,000% correct. That's who should be the peacekeeping force. What I don't want is any kind of security guarantees with respect to the current conflict. Okay, well, we'll keep funding you. We'll keep sending you bombs and missiles because you're giving us mineral concessions. That would be terrible. That would be a war crime right there. That would be a flat out war crime if that's what Trump is doing. And maybe he is. I wouldn't be shocked. All right, 240-242-5646. I was, let me see if there's any comments. Let me see. I go here. There's Ari, my loyal Ari there in the chat. Great to see your comments, your emojis, love them. I was taken by this video. This is from Jamarl Thomas, who I like, and I think he does a good show. So I try to support other podcasters in my space if I agree with their takes. And that's basically what I do. Like, my thing is, I care about your takes. I care about your arguments. I care about how persuasive you are. That's all I'm very not into personality. I don't look so much to talent. I remember back in the old Monterey days, and there was a Tom versus Ed, right? And a lot of people liked the Tom Hartman program, and they felt he was more, I guess, the professorial, more persuasive. I actually liked Ed better. Maybe that was in part personality. I really am not big about personality. I thought Ed's show actually was more sincere. I thought he was more a true friend of workers. That was what I gleaned from it. So that's why I liked him better. I don't think it was a question of talent, although I did think he was a more entertaining host, to be honest with you. So I guess entertainment factor matters to me, but only to a certain extent. I don't think Rachel Maddow is entertaining. I don't think she's talented, but let's hear what Ted Rall who I think he's a cartoonist, I believe, and a commentator, very progressive on the Jamarl Thomas program, has to say about Rachel Maddow.
To me.
Well, I mean, Rachel is literally absolutely. When my son was coming up, and he asked me one time, like, "Dad, what's a sellout?" I literally I was like, "So there's this woman Rachel Maddow."
Oh, she was your poster boy.
Well, she's the ultimate. She's the ultimate sellout because look. Maybe she migrated to the right organically. I don't believe that for a minute. She is a radical leftist like you and me. Okay.
So I don't know quite why he says that. He worked for her, I guess, or worked with her at Air America, 20 years ago. So the argument is I knew her then, but she was just presenting the arguments that her employer then wanted, Air America, which, by the way, wasn't radical leftist. She was very critical at that point of the W administration. I don't know that when Obama took power, she was critical of him. I don't remember that. She went to MSNBC maybe around 2010, 2011, 2012, something like that. And she always was corporatist. The criticisms that I remember of Rachel Maddow from the very beginning, she came from either a conservative Democratic or Republican family in the East Bay. And she was never that much of a lefty. Now, she is a lesbian. She was living in Northampton, Massachusetts, which is a very liberal community. And her identity, I only raise it because she was at that time pretty, I believe, strong when it came to issues like gay marriage. That was a very important issue to her. And she was critical of Hillary Clinton in that vein. But she never, in my recollection, and it goes back to 2004. So long before Maddow became part of the MSNBC team, is that she was always center left, never a raging progressive, as Ted Rawl claims. But I guess he would know better. Anyway, more from Rawl.
It's bullshit that she's like a corporate Democrat.
Are you serious?
It's all an act, okay? And she just does it for the money. I mean, if she blew her brains
But see, he's saying that she's just doing it for the money because Raw's argument is, well, she was different when she was on Air America. But she was doing, how do you know she wasn't doing it for the money then? I don't view Rachel Maddow as someone with any sincere beliefs one way or the other. He's calling her out. I don't think it really matters, but I don't think her history supports that reading.
I would not be at all surprised. I mean, it's complete like cognitive dissonance. She's just doing it for the cash. She's a cold-blooded like sellout. She's like she went for the Benjamins, and there's a lot of them, right? She's making like what, $20 million.
Oh, she's making a ton of money. She's making a ton of money.
Yeah, now it's 25 now. They said 20 million, 25 million, down from 30, right? It's crazy. Not just effing insane. You wouldn't get paid money like that unless you were presenting a worldview that was extremely congenial to the people who are paying you that money. And only people with hundreds of millions, billions of dollars have that kind of money to throw around. So obviously, she is sheepdogging, sheep-herding people into a corporate party, a party that enriches the wealthy and empowers the powerful. I don't think that record could ever be consistent with someone who, as Rawl says, is a raging lefty. If you really were truly progressive in your beliefs, then I don't think you could act the way she does. There's something that doesn't make sense to me. I don't think this is somebody who has any real convictions. I mean, maybe she just like, I don't care, I'm getting mine. I don't care what anyone else gets. But then if that's your attitude, you're not progressive. You're just not.
Oh, I mean, she works like crazy. But the thing is, it hurts your brain when someone that talented and that cool, like, that person sells out.
So I just was like taken aback by this statement. I mean, maybe, I don't know, Maddow, maybe in her heart of hearts, she truly believes in a world where all have enough and none have too much. Maybe that is what she really wants. Maybe she thinks the identity politics is a load of crap. Maybe she really recognized that Bernie would be a much better president for the American people. So maybe that's all true. I don't know. But I don't get how anyone can say she's cool or talented. It just totally goes over my head there. I care about what you say. I care about the arguments that you present in support of your position. I care about whether you are able to present a coherent, credible, attractive worldview and a way to get there. And Rachel Maddow does none of that. She smirks, she's smarmy, she's sarcastic and snarky. None of that, in my view, bespeaks any real talent. So I'm complete. Now I understand she's smart. She was a Rhodes Scholar, I think. She went to Harvard. All right, fine. But I don't find any of her shtick remotely appealing. So I don't understand, frankly, what the hell Ted Rawls talking about. And that's ultimately why I bring this up. And I would love, because I know people really like Rachel Maddow. They really enjoy her program. But I don't think they enjoy it because she's talented. I think they enjoy it because, I guess you could say that's talent, because of her contempt, because of the condescension which she treats those that she treats those who disagree with her, and that likewise disagree with her audience. But that's not talent. That's just nasty. That's just unpleasant. That's just mean. That's ultimately just dishonest, in my opinion. So I don't get it. I'd love to hear from someone, maybe post it in the chat or in response to this, in a comment, what it is you find, if you do find her in any way talented, as Ted Rawls suggests. Actually, there's a little more to that. I was gonna move on, but before I do, because I had a comment, but I actually have a little more, because Rawls continues in that vein of what a singular talent Rachel Maddow is. So let's play a little more from that.
Well, I mean, Rachel is literally absolutely, when my son was coming up.
Right, so we already heard this, so let me just stop that. I'm going to move it forward quite a bit, because I want to get to the part where he continues to, just how brilliant she is.
That person sells out, because you've really, imagine, seriously, if she were using her talent for good, for left-wing politics in some other broadcast medium, goodbye to, Amy Goodman, right? Bye.
So he's just like saying, look at how much more talented Maddow is than Amy Goodman, who does Democracy Now! Now, I have my differences with Amy Goodman. I don't think she's critical enough of the Democrat Party elites. I think that when she does take them on, she pulls her punches to a degree. I think she has been captured by is she on NPR? I'm not sure. She's certainly, she has her own Democracy Now! Network. I think there's a little bit of a capture by, lefty liberals who are not prepared to fully embrace, an alternative to the duopoly, that view still the Democratic Party as a potential landing space for them. For her guests, she has on Democrats like Ro Khanna relatively frequently. She's accepted some of the national security state propaganda. Not all of it, but some of it. So I'm not a huge fan or an uncritical fan of Amy Goodman, but I don't accept for 1 second Ted Rawls' framing of Rachel Maddow as this monster talent that's just head and shoulders above Amy Goodman. Not at all. I actually think Amy Goodman does a pretty darn good show. It's extremely informative. there's a ton of information that she presents. She's not perfect. And I don't always agree with what she has to say. Certainly she was unfair to Jill Stein. She had Jill Stein on her show, though. Rachel Maddow couldn't even... to argue that Rachel Maddow was this mega talent would mean, in my view, that she would have on a Jill Stein. And if she was, as much as she's critical of Jill Stein, she'd be able to present a coherent, cogent argument against voting for Jill Stein. She couldn't do that. She can't do that. She won't do that. So I reject this idea that there's anything particularly appealing, attractive, talented about Rachel Maddow. But then I never thought much of Rush Limbaugh either. So, this is a guy who had, an audience at one point of 25 million people on radio. So, they appeal to people, but they leave me completely cold. So I don't really get the argument that they're somehow special or talented. All right, yesterday, I spent a lot of time, I talked about Bernie. Is he a sellout? He was called a sellout. And, is that fair? He's not a savior, as some have called him, but is he a sellout? Is that fair? And I ultimately concluded he's something else. And I made the argument that one reason I don't consider him a sellout is because we could have voted for him. We could have made him the Democratic nominee, and we didn't. Is that his fault or is that our fault? Has he completely sold out democracy when there was a real opportunity to make him the president? And the response I got from Michael, which I'm going to share here, was, and I really appreciated what he had to say, and I didn't argue with it because I don't think he's wrong, but I don't think he's completely right either. So what Michael is saying here is, hey, I thought what you had to say was interesting, but we don't have a democracy. Just because we might have had an opportunity to vote for Bernie doesn't mean we live we're free, we're liberated. So he writes, I enjoyed your talk, but and by the way, thank you for that. Huge props for enjoying my talk, right? I mean, that's what I really like. But must stand with the belief that we, the people, have lost our country. There's so much truth to it. The media is fundamentally dishonest. It doesn't tell us the truth. It hides so much. They cheerlead these horrible wars. They refuse point blank to hold some politicians accountable and are completely misrepresent others unfairly. All of that is true. But I think many of us see through that crap. We get it. And we don't like it, and we speak out against it. I'm able to do this YouTube program. So I can't, it's not a question of even being hopeless, right? Like, oh, well, you're hopeless because, I could say, well, you're being completely hopeless because you don't believe in the power of democracy. And I don't go there. I get why people would feel that we've lost the country. But I stand firm in my view that if we could and we can and we should unite in support of truly progressive candidates, and we've had opportunities to vote for them. Sometimes they betray us. Barack Obama ran as a progressive. He presented as a progressive. He betrayed us, but we had an opportunity to elect him. And we, in response to the failures of the Obama administration, we could have elected Bernie Sanders, and we didn't. I'm not going to excuse the Democratic Party voters who failed. All right, I want to play this clip. We're getting towards the end of the show, but I've heard so much because I'm in the Washington, D.C. area, from federal employees, from former federal employees, from people who work for federal contracting companies. And there's so much, as it says, there's confusion, there's fear. It's terrible what Trump's doing. It really is. It's terrible what Musk is doing. Let's play this clip and I'll give a little bit of a take on it.
Members, should they respond? Should they not respond?
So the question here is, and I started right in the middle, she's asking this, I believe he's a labor union representative, I believe, represents federal workers. What should federal workers do when they get these questionnaires from Musk? Because, and I've heard, they're getting them in their emails. What did you do over the last week? Please identify everything you've done, or you lose your job. So those are pretty scary to get. Here's what the rep says.
We're advising that they listen to the agency heads. So if their agency head is Tulsi Gabbard, I would listen to her and not the email from the Office of Personnel Management. By
the way, that is so, I agree with that 100%. The problem is Trump has empowered Musk. Maybe Musk can fire these people even over Tulsi. So if you work in the Office of National Intelligence, yes, she is ultimately your boss, Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence. But if Musk goes to Trump and says, I want these people fired from the Office of National Intelligence, will Trump go to Tulsi and say, should we fire them? Or will he just do it without even her input? And is she in cahoots? We don't know. Maybe she's like, whatever Doge wants, I'll do. I don't know that. I'm just speculating. But yeah, the agency head, the agency director should be making these decisions. But for whatever reason, Trump has completely taken them out, at least of the evaluation process. And it's wrong. It's wrong. Because again, using Tulsi as an example, because she is the legally appointed and confirmed director. Elon Musk is nobody. He's nothing. He's just the richest man in the world that Trump is working with.
Another one of those situations where there's a lot of legal uncertainty around it. And if, we don't have, I wouldn't say in every single case you shouldn't respond, because I don't know what the implications are going to be of that. But certainly look to guidance from your agency and your agency head. Agency heads are appointed by the president with the advice and consent of the Senate. There is kind of clear role and constitutional authority for that, which is not the case with Doge and emails from hr@opm.gov.
So on X, Elon Musk actually put out a poll that he pinned to his page asking kind of just the public in general if people should be forced to do this, write down what they did for the past week. And people who have responded to his poll overwhelmingly said yes, that they should. What is the difference between asking an employee what they accomplished with no strings attached, not knowing, that this could be the loss of a job, to asking somebody to tell me what you did last week with that almost like overwhelming feeling that you have to give the right answer or you could lose your livelihood?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything offensive about a manager asking an employee what they did last week or having a system of performance management and review. That's nothing, that's not something that we would object to. It's the manner in which this is being done in the context of all these other cuts to the federal workforce. And in the context of the fact that it's unclear that Elon Musk has the authority to do this.
Right. So basically what I was saying also, but it's really interesting, right? So Musk puts this on X and people are like, yeah, you're right. It's okay to ask workers what they did over the past week. And part of that is a selected audience, right? A lot more and more, I think X is becoming a home for more conservative and more MAGA folks, not exclusively. And I think, frankly, those who tell me I should be more on Blue Sky and less on X are wrong. I mean, Blue Sky, to me, from what I've observed, is far more tendentious and far more propagandized than X. Not that X isn't, but that's how bad Blue Sky is. That said, again, you've got a selected audience on X, so they're going to probably agree with Musk more like often than not. But I think what's really interesting, what's important to realize here is that federal employees, and I've said this, have it pretty darn good compared to most employees in a lot of ways. And rather than standing, see, and this is, and I'm painting with an extraordinarily broad brush, but federal employees have been, based on my experience, just people I know. They're not rabble-rousers. They're not radical. They're not lefties. They're just sort of pretty much standard issue Democratic voters is what they are. The vast majority of them vote Democratic, and that's fine. They weren't up in arms over the fact that they weren't up in arms over the fact that Biden just destroyed the railway workers' ability to strike. They haven't stood in support of the PRO Act, which would make it easier for workers in the private sector to organize. They have union. Federal workers have their many government unions, AFSCME, American Federation of Government Employees. Others are represented by SEIU. Their Amalgamated Transit Union represents many who work in transportation. So the idea that the federal workers should get this special treatment as perceived by those in the private sector is looked at with great resentment and anger by workers who say, what about us? We get nothing. How come they're getting why are they all up in outrage about their having to justify their continued employment? Nobody protects us. This is all so foreseeable. And I can tell you Democrats couldn't care less. They don't give a crap. Not the Democratic elites, not the Democratic leadership. They're just speaking out against what's happening now to these federal employees. There's not one word about how the Biden administration repeatedly betrayed workers. Oh no, they're the most labor-friendly administration since FDR. It's just not true. It's just there was a couple of decent appointments at the NLRB. There was no consistent push to increase union density or to act as a truly pro-worker administration. Nothing would be better for workers than Medicare for all. And close second would be a truly coherent, consistent trade policy designed to bring lots of jobs back to the United States. And Biden didn't pursue either of those two, not even close. Breaking up oligopolies, monopolies, oligopolies, that would be very, very good for workers. And I give Biden some credit with Lena Khan. That was a positive. This wasn't their worst theater of operations. The worst theater of operations for Joe Biden and Harris was foreign policy. Absolutely devastating. Absolutely destructive. Horrific. Monstrous. But let's not overdo it when it comes to how they treated workers. It wasn't very good either. And because of that, and because federal workers were content, satisfied to sit on the sidelines and not consolidate with their fellow private sector laborers don't really give a crap what's happening to those federal employees. All right, I will be back tomorrow. We will have on, and I'm looking forward to speaking to Chuck Pinocchio. He is the SBUCA, State-Based Universal Healthcare Act. Let's see if we can get universal health coverage, at least in some states. That's their goal, and I couldn't support anything more strongly. I'm actually going to talk to Chuck and really focus now on even more micro, right, on local healthcare. Can we somehow pull off a universal healthcare bill for a city, for a county, rather than even for an entire state? Thanks so much for watching Halitics, for listening to Halitics. Last request, yes, please, if you haven't yet done so, do click that subscribe button and click like as well. I will be back tomorrow.